Welcome to our seminar on global catastrophic risks. We will start in a minute or so. Vi hälsar er välkomna till ett seminarium om jordens globala risker. Det kanske inte är så upplyftande, men förhoppningsvis kan vi göra någonting åt dem innan det är för sent. Vi ser vad klockan är. Då är klockan 15 och vi börjar väl på tid. Svensk radiotid som vi brukar säga. Och vi kommer att ha ett seminarium på engelska som hanterar globala katastrofala risker. So very welcome to this seminar on global catastrophic risks. Many things are discussed here at Almedalen and in this area, Sweden in the world. And now we are going to talk about something I would think concern us all and not the least future generations, and that is global catastrophic risk. I would say that Sweden has a long tradition on supporting international cooperation, and how can we support this one? How can Sweden influence and develop international community to take actions on global catastrophic risk? But before that, perhaps we should talk a little bit on the global catastrophic risk, and I will soon give the floor to Fredrik Karlsson, who is the director at Global Challenges Foundation. But first, let me introduce the panel standing beside me. Here is Charlotte Petri Gornicka, who many of you perhaps know as the former head of SIDA. She's now the chair of the Development Assistance Committee, DAC, at the OECD. And beside her is Anders Renberg, who is the EU and international spokesperson at the Liberal Youth Club, or whatever. And on your right side is Maher Nasser. We are very happy to have you here, flying in from New York. Maher Nasser is the director of UN Outreach Division at the Department of Public Information. And on your right side, we have Kristina Persson. Very glad to have you here. You are familiar to us in many capacities. You were former Minister of Strategic Development and are also the funder of another think tank called the Global Challenge. And first, Fredrik, perhaps you can guide us a little bit on what are actually the catastrophic risks. We can all reckon the ones we see as important. Which ones do you want to highlight?
Thank you, Jens. So I'm sure that I'm in front of a crowd that knows that our planet and our societies face big challenges and grave risks. And you all probably know also that the definition of risk is the probability of event occurring times the impact of that event. And so at the Global Challenges Foundation, and I'll choose to just talk about the risks that we have chosen to focus on. We were created 6 years ago to bring attention to a particular kind of risk, namely risks related to events of low probability, but related to global catastrophic impact. So low probability, but huge impact, you might say. And of the kind that where one such incident would actually be one too many. So these are the risks that we wanted to focus on. You'd sometimes talk about global catastrophic risk to describe these. And the reason we wanted to focus on these risks is that they are generally quite hard to grasp. They are hard to quantify. They are long-term in nature. They are global in nature. And so they tend to fall off the short-sighted and very often locally defined business and political agendas. And what this means is that we end up facing risks that would be quite unacceptable if we compare them to the risk averseness that we have for more familiar events, such as risks in traffic or cancerogen substances or what have you. When it comes to the global and long-term risks, it seems that we accept much higher risks, and that's something we want to address at the Global Challenges Foundation. We have chosen to focus on three particular risks, and that is catastrophic climate change scenarios. It's other large-scale environmental degradation, and it's politically motivated violence as it's expressed in weapons of mass destruction. And we also look at some drivers behind those risks, such as poverty, population growth, and actually political violence also qualifies as one of the drivers as well as one of the risks. And so what signifies these kind of risks? A few things. They are highly complex. So both the reasons and the causes behind the risks are hugely complex, and so the solutions to tackle this risk would have to be very complex as well. So we have to deal with the dynamics of complex adaptive systems and so on. As I've said, they are global, right, trans-border. They can only be dealt with at the global level. And we argue that the risks that we work with are also urgent. I mean, we've seen the last decade how the risk for actually catastrophic climate change scenarios have increased significantly, as we've learned about words such as tipping points and runaway global warming, which is related to systemic large-scale changes. And we are also pushing at some of the other global boundaries that define the safe operating space for our species in issues such as biodiversity and nitrogen flows and the rapid changes of land use and so on. So we would argue it's urgent to tackle those risks, and the question then is, how do we tackle those? And that's where we also have our other strand of our work, which is global governance and global governance reform. So we want to raise awareness of the risk, and we want to talk about and drive ideation when it comes to global governance reform. And we would say that the gap between the urgency and the action suggests that there's a need for global governance reform. And a recent survey that we did also showed that there's a popular demand for global governance reform. We did a survey in 10 countries showing that 70–80% of people in those countries ask for UN reform and new international institutions. And so that's why Global Challenges Foundation will continue to raise awareness on catastrophic risks and stimulate ideation and innovation when it comes to global catastrophic risks. And so as a part of that ongoing conversation, very welcome to this panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. And I think we will set this up like a talk. You can raise your hand, or you didn't need to ask for permission to talk from me, but rather, and then we can see at the end of the discussion if we have some thoughts from the audience that are here. But Fredrik described the catastrophic risks, and it's often, I mean, in my life, it's often easier to see your individual risks if you, in traffic, as you said, but common risks are not that easy to grasp. But what would you say from your perspectives, how serious are these common global risks? Mahir?
Thank you. Thank you for actually the opportunity to be here and for organizing on this topic. And I apologize for speaking in English because that's the language I know. The other language I know is Arabic, so unless maybe I should stick to English. I think you have picked risks that are indeed catastrophic for humanity and that go beyond borders. And this is the issue, that some countries might face specific risks, but the ones that cross the border impact and affect all of humanity. And in his speech to the General Assembly in September of last year, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which was the first time he addressed in that forum, in the general debate, he outlined 7 challenges, and the 3 you mentioned are among the 7. The first one he spoke about was the return of the nuclear peril, and we saw elements of that with the rising tension with North Korea, and they talk about canceling the Iran deal and all of that. Hopefully, we're back on track to some extent, and that has subsided. We wait and see. The second threat that he mentioned is, of course, ongoing conflict, persistent conflict that have generated and created massive movement of people that we have not seen before. World Refugee Day was last week. 68.5 million people are today displaced because of conflict, because of war, because of climate change, because of environmental degradation. And 23 million of those are displaced outside of their country, so they are refugees. The third threat is terrorism, global terrorism, and the threat of weapons of mass destruction falling in the hands of terrorists. But what terrorists do is also sow divisions between societies and among societies. And I think that is their number one weapon, is using terror to divide. And I think we have to be aware of that risk. A fourth risk is climate change. And I think we all agree now, except maybe a small minority of people who insist that it's a hoax or it doesn't exist, is that it is one of the most existential threats to humanity today. And that no country, no matter how big, how strong, how influential, will be able to deal with the catastrophes related to climate change. Number 4 is rising inequalities. And I think this is an element that you will find it maybe even in rich societies. There are now more divisions between those who have and those who have not. Today in the world, there are, I think, 8 men, and they are men, whose wealth is equivalent to more than 60% of humanity. And that is something that is incredible. There are 7 corporations, they are all technological corporations today, that their wealth, 5 of them, the American ones, their wealth is equivalent to the entire GDP of Africa, of 54 countries in Africa. And these are Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. If you combine their market value, that's total to the GDP of 54 African countries. So rising inequality is another concern. The 6th one is the dark side of innovation. I mean, we are all enjoying the technology that has made life easier in many ways, but maybe also more complicated. But there are elements of it that are causing a lot of anxieties about artificial intelligence, about cybersecurity, about the loss of privacy, and where and how and who is actually developing norms, ethical guidelines to deal with big data, to deal with what could become a problem that we will regret in the future. And the 7th threat he spoke about is people on the move. And that relates to the number I mentioned before. So these are crises that are today facing us, and I don't think anybody can claim that they don't exist. The question is, how do we approach them? And I think the best way is to talk about them openly and to address the root causes of most of them. Some people react better if you give them a cause to work for, hope, rather than scare. And I think looking back at the last 3 years, the global goals, the agenda of sustainable development goals that was approved by all heads of state, world leaders in 2015, has given us that agenda. 2015 was adopted with 17 goals that by the year 2030 we can work to deal with a society that we all enjoy. And I think maybe we can talk more about that, is that if we work to achieve that, then that also deals with the risks and the crisis.
Christina?
Okay. Well, Agenda 2030, we have agreed on it. All the heads of state agreed. And that was, we started 3 years ago soon. And, but it's not being implemented. And this is the key, and this is the reason why we are here, to discuss the reasons why nothing is happening, although we have the facts, we have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have even the will. I mean, the agenda is an expression of will by the world community to change, to transform the world into a sustainable system, ecological system, social system, economic system, etc. But we're not doing it. So why? And that is lack of governance, lack of leadership. And to have a global leadership, global governance, means that we have to cooperate very, very closely with one another. And in order to do that and to have the trust for one another, we need to have national governance. So we are in a crisis. We are heading towards a critical situation as a result of climate warming, for instance, and other risks that might occur, because we don't have the ability to steer our collective lives. We don't have the governance, the systems to govern ourselves. And to have it globally, we have to develop it nationally also. So this is something we have to do, each country by itself, at the same time as we need to build alliances with one another. Some more easy than others to become an ally with. And the guys, the men and women who form these alliances need to change the mood, the way of thinking and acting among the others. In the United States, for instance, there is a lot of need to press for change in the leadership, the attitude of the leadership as regards climate warming, for instance, and inequality or other risks. So,
Anders?
No, I completely agree with you, but I also think that we look at, is this working?
Yes.
The division of power and democracy as well, because one of the issues that we're seeing right now, you talked about the United States, and I completely agree. And the problem that arises is that if because we have this dependent system where what happens in one country highly affects other countries. And when we have a system where one country also can block change in the world, then it becomes very, very difficult. I think we see this very often, time and time again in the European Union, whereas there is a clear majority for opinions. If we talk about migration, if we talk about climate change, and if we talk about a lot of the issues, equally we talk about trade. But then we see that there are some small countries almost as well who blocks this change. So I think that we have to consider the very concept of democracy. For me, it's not democratic that Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic and Slovakia can block the development of migration in Europe when there is a majority foreign opinion. So I think that we have to look at division of power on different levels. Equally, because there are many, many issues that has to be dealt with on a local level. I can only imagine what would happen if the government of Sweden would take care of public transport in the entire country. That would be very, very problematic. So that has to happen on a local level. So I think that we really, really have to discuss, when we talk about global governance, we have to talk about global division of power. So what can change and on what levels should things be dealt with? And I think that's one of the key issues. Because we also have, and I will finish on that, but we have a situation where we do have a lot of nationalist, populist governments and parties arising, and it is their democratic right to be elected, but we also have to create a system where one populist government cannot block the entire European Union or equally the entire world. So I think this is something that really, really has to be discussed.
I think we can agree on the risks we see, but I also think it's important that we perhaps take some energy and hope from something that we actually have been through. I represent the donor community, if you will, 30 governments who make up the 80% of the financing for the multilateral system. I'm not saying that to say that I'm powerful, but it's really a force. When that community started to talk to each other 50 years ago, 3.5 billion people lived on the earth and 2 billion were actually poor. And today, 50 years later, there are 7 billion people, and we say that around about 10% of them are poor in 50 years. I guess poverty was high on the crisis list then and now. And, you know, we've done good things over the years with political volatility as well. So, yes, it's difficult today, but we have done some good things. And I think that let's not question the framework. Let's agree that we agreed on the SDGs, not try to find another tool, because it's so good if we can combine working for the different goals, if you will, but crack really the horizontal work, to see it as one response to a global agenda, and to find ways of working regionally and globally with crisis. I do think that we can obviously, and I have to do that a lot, work with the 80% of the financing of the multilateral system, the UK, the US, the Swedes of the world, and really cajole with them to make sure that they look into how they govern the system that they want to implement for them. But we can also look at what happened when society as a whole came together around the Millennium Development Goals that we, debate if they were successful or not. But child mortality went down, for instance. Why did it do that? Was it because we had one language and all parts of society actually rallied around some objectives? And I do think now we really need to say, please, civil society and a bit of business, challenge governments now to step up, show that you are part of the solution. And I would say that the more we plan for active civil society engagement in the systems we have and use that as a pressure, the better the leaders will become. And I see that as part of the solution, and also where Swedish leadership could perhaps show the way. So.
Mm-hmm. Anders, you said that, and you said also Charlotte and the others, that, I mean, there are institutions that every day are handling things, and in the UN you are doing so much. At the same time, we hear these news about climate changes and that we need to take quicker steps, or even some say that perhaps it's not enough, it's too late. But Anders, do you think that we can come to a situation where we can give legal rights to that? You said that the UN needs, European Union need more of perhaps majority decision or legal right, and the UN perhaps has to have more legal capacity and muscles because there are so many conventions, but they are not used. But is there a legitimacy for that? I mean, we are in Sweden and other European countries complaining about Europe taking decisions away from us. And how can we deal with that? Could civil society say, we would like you to take more of majority decisions or whatever?
No, I completely agree, and I think that we have to look at it from a step perspective. We cannot, and perhaps definitely should not, have a UN global government. At least we're very, very far away from there at the moment, and that's not going to happen. But what we have, and what's the area and the arena for Sweden is the European Union. That's where we mostly can affect. I believe that it's very good that we're in the UN Security Council at the moment. It's good that we work very effectively and have people in high positions in the OECD as well. But we have to push in the European Union at the moment. And if you look at the views of the European population, there is a clear majority for putting some issues more on a European decision basis. We have migration as one of them. So I think there is actually a clear majority for more governance on a European level. But that has to be implemented in the right way. We should not have the so-called bureaucrats in Brussels make the decision for us. What we have to look at, if we look at the European Union, is give more power to the directly elected European Parliament so that they can have the right to make some decisions. And even more so, not just have to rely on the Commission and on the European Council. So I think there are ways of doing it, but we should never ever forget, and we should always continue to push for more democracy. My point was simply that a European Parliament might have more democratic legitimacy than a local parliament in Sweden would have pushing some issues. So I think this is where the importance is, the clear division of power. It doesn't mean that we're switching power and moving it to the European Union or downwards. It's division of power.
Kristina?
Yeah, well, we have Europe, and that is our platform for regional governance. And but we don't have a strong cooperation, not a cooperation strong enough, because we are always trying to agree, 100% agree, all the countries. Sometimes we have to agree to take a decision, but we should not be limited by that. I'm not a politician any longer, so I can say what I think. And I think that we should go ahead. The 24 or 25 or 23 or whatever who could agree on an agenda that is respectful, humanistic, and the right for Europe to deal with migration, to receive the refugees in a decent way, and to share responsibility. So if Hungary and Poland and maybe Italy and maybe some other country want to stay out, let them stay out and let them pay a price for that too, but that's a different question. And cooperate. Those of you who can, those of us who can cooperate, should cooperate and go ahead and push and try to get something done. We don't have the time to let all the sufferance, all the problems that are created by not dealing in a good way with migration. And this problem will increase. So we must prepare for more refugees, more climate refugees, as we can see the probability of continued climate warming is very high. And there is the effect of that will be that some parts of the world will not be not be habitable. We will not be able to live in the most populated areas along the seashores, oceans. People will have to move. So we are moving towards a situation of chaos and conflict and chaotic situation if we don't try to build the system to deal with it. And we must be realistic. We must go ahead now and do it.
May I ask you, Maher Nasser, when Christina talks about that, we have to go ahead, perhaps some alliance of the willings in the Europe context. But if you look at it globally, do you think that there is also a need for an alliances of countries who want to go ahead, take decisions for themselves, live up to these decisions, or pressure on a more democratic system within for instance, the Security Council or something?
I think it's important to realize that even if Europe comes together and agree among itself on the way forward, it will not be able to do so in isolation of the rest of the world. I mean, these issues cross border, cross oceans, cross the Mediterranean. And I think there has been a lot of progress, by the way, on the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, we have seen something unprecedented, not only the reductions in poverty, improvements on maternal health and infant mortality, number of children and girls going to schools, gender equality, it's still far behind, but there is progress on that. On climate change, the Paris Agreement showed us the way. Yes, but when the US president announced that the government was walking away, we saw 17 states within the United States, businesses, mayors of the largest cities said, we are committed and we will continue to work on that. What I think is the way forward is that we need a global movement of people, no matter what your political system is, that can hold politicians accountable, no matter whether they are from the right, left wing or totalitarian. But politicians usually want to stay in power, and I think to stay in power, they need to maintain a certain level of acceptance. And if we create a movement globally that says, listen, you all agreed on this agenda for 2030, we want to hold you accountable and we want it to be achieved. And I think creating a push globally on that, and every year, next week, I think, we have something called the High Level Political Forum, which is a new thing that started from 2015, and it has been growing, and a number of countries that are coming to New York and say, we have done the following in the last year for the SDGs. We have put in place monitoring. We are achieving this and achieving that. I think the more we do of that, the more that becomes the agenda that politicians globally are held accountable for. And it needs people, and it needs businesses, and it needs civil society for that to happen. And I have seen unprecedented interest from private sector. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I was in Cannes, which is the global festival of creativity, where the advertising world comes together. And their main goal is, of course, to sell things and to sell goods and to become, the top of the world. They created a new lion, the SDG Cannes Lion Award. And they had 900 submissions, and advertisers, creatives are now coming to say, how can we be part of the solution? Because last year I challenged them. I said, you're responsible for part of the problem. Consumption-based economies. Today you are encouraging people you make us buy things we don't need. You have to also be part of the solution. And I think industries, civil society, individuals also have a responsibility. Political leadership, definitely, but politicians, if you don't hold them accountable, they'll do what is in their own best interest.
Charlotte?
Yeah, we agree on that, and that's what I said. I think we want to encourage civil society to play that role, but we also need decision makers and those who deliver services to do things. So there has to be more than that. And what we see, again, going back to the 30 donor countries, we see a lot of less interest in the development policy area. The debate in many countries at home is questioning whether development aid works, and there's a lot of distrust for many reasons around development aid as part of the solution to what we're discussing here. So development ministers are actually having a hard time defending their own policy area. And solutions that are being discussed instead are security solutions and protectionism and more borders and more kind of let's do it at home instead of working in cooperation. One country is driving this more than others, which is the US, obviously, and also in trade, and they don't believe in the multilateral system, so they withdraw their funding and all of that. Now I'm going to turn this into the positive. Because we see a reaction amongst many governments that actually are now a little bit challenged and inspired by the fact that some countries who used to be the drivers in development are moving away. So we can see actually a beginning of a movement within governments to be much more active on implementing the SDGs. Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, this is Sweden in the world. We're here to talk about Sweden in the world. I bet that we could get 10 to 15 countries, not only Europe, and partner countries that would want to prove the interdependent concept instead of the self-interest concept. But somebody has to start. And there is a possibility for Sweden to bring 2 or 3 other colleagues and start to drive that process. And there is, I would say, a coalition of the willing just waiting for that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. May I ask you, and also invite you, if you have any questions or comments, sometimes it's said that when you should build advocacy or your opinion, you have to define your enemy. What is against us? What is the obstacle? Is it us as individuals? Are there structures? Or what is it that we have to deal with or even combat on going this path, on dealing with catastrophic risks? Anders, and then Christina.
I think there's no one answer to the question, but I think one of the problems with this is that the enemy, in some sense, is ourselves. The society that we have built up and the situations that we have. If we look at climate change, the problem is us, our countries, our world that is moving on in a pace that is not acceptable. So I think that is one thing that we have to consider. But also to be on a more positive note, because we talked about the Paris Agreement and we talked about the climate change situation, and we also remember what happened when we had the Copenhagen discussions. A lot of problems with implementation, but then one thing also happened. A lot of major cities in the world went together and said that, okay, actually, if our governments will not do this, we will do it. And I also think that we have to think about the same thing when it comes to all of these issues. And it's not only the societies, it's, as you said, it has to be the companies, it has to be the civil society organizations. And I also think, because one thing that we didn't touch upon yet, and it's sort of, though stretching it in answer to your question, is media and the general debate, because our debate tends to be very focused on national level, whereas more and more decisions are made on a local or national level. So I think that we also have to do what you said and push for that, because there is, sometimes we can define the enemy, but sometimes there is simply so that we have to change our world for the better. But yes, the issue is sometimes that there are no clear enemy, or it's not clearly defined.
Mm-hmm. Christina?
Well, the problem is that we have, during the last 200 years or so, we have constructed a society that is completely dependent on fossil fuel. And the big problem is we are continuing to doing so. Last year, 2017, the investments in fossil energy production increased twice as quickly, twice the speed of the investments of in renewable energy. So we are investing much more continue to invest much more in fossil than we invest in fossil in the renewables. Although we know that renewables now has gone down in price, it's not enough. So, and this cannot be changed by industry or business or civil society. I agree. I mean, civil society and business behavior, thinking and acting right now is what gives me hope. That is much more hopeful than what the nations are doing. But they cannot do it by themselves because we are dependent on systems, on structures, and they have to be changed. The price relations must be changed, so we act in a way that will make a transformation possible. And I think individual countries can do a lot too. I mean, a country like Sweden is very well apt to lead by good examples, by going ahead of others. It will not be costly as many people think. It might even be favorable for the competitive edge in the long run because we will lead in the technical development. And we can also lead by showing others that it is possible, that you can keep employment high and wealth also on a good level, although you transform your country into a fossil-free economy. And we have even a law now saying that we should do that. By 2045, we should have zero emissions, net zero emissions in Sweden. That has been decided by the parliament. So what are we waiting for? Let's do it. But we are moving too slowly. It's not enough with just business and civil society and etc. We have to change fundamental structures in our society.
Charlotte?
I don't know who's going to answer this question because it's a question to the Swedish government. So let's be the Swedish government. No, the thing is that we are a very big stakeholder in the UN system, together with others. And we have a Secretary General who said much of the solution to many of the things we're talking about is prevention rather than plastering with immediate, trying to solve immediate needs with a lot of money. And he's really preaching that. And he is very active in a UN reform process. Do we believe in that? Do we believe that really engaging in a UN process will help us to do what we are discussing here? If we are, we have to work like to make it work. And we actually pay this system. So if we want something that's there to work for us, I guess the Swedish government and others need to work with the Secretary General. Do we think he's right? Is it prevention that is part of the solution? Well, let's then work with the UN Secretary General. If there are other solutions, we also need to be very clear that we cannot probably pay 2 or 3 systems. So where do we engage and how do we spend the money? And how much time do we really spend on thinking through governance and management on these issues? Too little, I would argue, and it's not sexy to debate either, because it's not the issue as such which gives, a heartbeat. It's really boring, but it's so important. And I don't know if we are a good stakeholder or shareholder. Are we a good stakeholder or shareholder in the UN system? Sweden.
Don't be too polite.
No,
now.
please, debate.
I think sorry, is this on? Yes, thank you. Yeah, Sweden today took over the presidency of the Security Council. Sweden is one of the top donors, one of the countries that have approached the percentage of ODA to others. And the world over, people look at Sweden because what you have achieved in terms of welfare state, in terms of when you look about the 5 happiest countries in the world, Sweden and the other 4 are also Scandinavian countries. So this is natural that people who want a better life thinking, well, let's go to Sweden, but maybe you could have a better weather and more sun. No. Then you would have more people coming into Sweden. But
plenty of space here.
to go back to your original question, Jens, I think complacency is a big danger for all of us. complacency and short-termism. I mean, sometimes we achieve something and we think, great, let's pat ourselves on the shoulder. We've reduced poverty from 53% in 1990 to 9% today. Good job. No, it's not good job, because we still have 880 million people who are living on less than $2 a day, or $1.95. I think that is a big danger. To go to your point, it is not enough for individuals and businesses. I think regulation and government action is a must. We have the example of the ozone layer, the protocol, the Montreal Protocol, 1980s. Many of you here were not born yet. I think the young people have much at stake. But in the early 80s, the biggest thing people were talking about in terms of environmental and climate change was somewhere in the back. There was a big hole in the ozone layer that everybody's saying we're going to die from skin cancer and all of that. And it was caused by something that humanity created, which is hydrochlorocarbons. I mean, this is a substance that went into aerosols, it went into air conditioning systems and all of that. So the Montreal Protocol was, under the auspices of the United Nations, an agreement that phased using of all these chemicals. And now we look back 30 years later, the ozone layer is healing. It's no longer on the... So we know that is a must. But the world is much bigger today, and governments are smaller, and companies are larger. And I think it's important for also the brands, because they know, they do a lot of market research. Generation Z and the millennials, they often base their purchase on the brand and how they associate with the brand, and the brand associates with their ethics or not. And I think this is an important, I mean, is Apple investing in renewable energy or not? And I think they are now saying we are. Is Google part of the solution or part of the problem? And I think they are also trying to be part of the solution. They have immense resources. The amount of, I mean, we will soon approach the $1 trillion company. When one of them is almost there, Apple is almost there. They're also in China. I mean, by the way, it's not all American. I mean, you have Tencent and Alibaba in China. They are all among the 7 top companies. So complacency is a big danger. We have to always ensure that short-termism, usually we all work for short terms, but we have to think in the long term. And this is where young people and youth come into it.
And these companies are also making their money when they meet consumers. And we talked about what the politicians need to do, but the politicians are very much affected by movements.
Yep.
Looking back in Sweden, we can see a gender equality movement, a liberal movement, a labor movement, a green movement. Is there a shortage of a Save the Earth movement? Because when we talk to scientists, I met with Johan Rockström the other week, he said, well, I was sometimes considered an alarmist, but when I was that, we can see that I actually underestimated what is now happening. So I think the researchers, to some degree, must tell what it is and not give hope. That's for others, but say, this is how bad it is. But is there a lack of this movement of saving us from global catastrophic risks? Anders, Kristina.
I think definitely, but also if we're looking at how has society changed, we have a lot of global movements in terms of, here also actually like Facebook and Google comes into it, but because people log into Facebook and then if they see something happening in some other country that they think is unacceptable, then they will push for it from a global perspective. So it's very common, and this is also I think where youth comes into it. Sometimes it's small issues or small, but about for example an American doctor shooting a lion in Zambia, and sometimes it's about climate change. But we see a lot of these issues where young people, millions of young people and older people as well, engage together. So I think that we have to see that this is happening as well. So the problem might rather be that we have the lack of political leadership to bring it through, or the lack of listening. That we have a lot of people talking, but we don't have a lot of dialogue between the different groups. So I think that, yes, it has to happen, but to a certain extent, we have to see that it is happening, and we have to manage it and deal with it as well.
Kristina?
Yeah, definitely we need action, organized action, movements, strong organizations to push for better politicians and better parties and better results, more results. But we don't see enough of it. And we see even in Sweden, the best country in the world, we see a lack of confidence in political parties. less than half the people have confidence in the political parties, according to an investigation. And we see that young people, they're not interested to get organized, not even older people, to get organized in political movements. And you see also at the same time a very individualistic behavior. You can be politically very interested in society and in the future, but you don't get organized and act together with others. You are at your PC, you are organized in the social media societies collectively at times, but not in the way that could form new governments. We need new leadership, new governance. And you need also to have, I think you have to push by also educating our leaders so that we can cope with the complexity of time, the societies of our times, the new technology, and also all the threats, ecological threats that we're living with.
Charlotte?
Yeah, I think there's, again, I think I'm the hope person here then.
I'm too.
No, well, good. No, but I do think we see a lot of quickly moving movement, and I do believe in that. That's what we said. We need the push from the movements. But I see also, even in dear beloved Johan Rockström, that there's nothing that comes without a risk. We don't want a movement that talks only about climate. We want a movement who talks as much about the holistic agenda, inclusive growth within planetary boundaries. The SDGs are more than one, it's more than water, it's more than children, it's more than this and that. And you cannot ask people who are voluntarily engaged to take responsibility for the whole agenda. It's not going to work like that. So there's still a system that has to kind of glue it all together and think more horizontally. But one thing I heard today from the Swedish institutional funders, which I thought was very useful, was, you know, the pension funds. They have been thinking about green bonds. So they started to think, well, that's the first bond to invest. But then the next bond might be in gender. So is that a pink bond? And then whatever, is that a yellow bond? And they started to realize it's a good thing that has started, but we might build silos in this SDG agenda instead of creating what this agenda is about, a holistic governmental agenda. So maybe we should talk about an SDG bond or a statsobligation in the Swedish language to really be part of governing the financing for this SDG agenda. These kind of discussions we need to have, and I think politicians would probably be helped by that.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, to give incentives on what we decide or not. The last word goes to the youngest generation on stage.
Thank you very much. No, but I think
give us hope. Sing a song.
I will try. No, but I think that if we look at, because I think that what you're saying is completely correct, because what I said before about these movements on the short term on some specific issues, the problem with them, and that's also connected to what Christina says, is that they don't have the capacity or capability to follow up. And because they push for one issue, and then that creates a situation where I think many politicians, they also give a quick response, and then they give a new quick response, and then another and another. So what I think that we really need is political leadership, and to end where we started, because I think that the political parties, they have to think about, and I don't have the solution for it, but they have to think about how do we engage young people, how do we engage old people, how do we engage everyone in order to see the entire approach and to look at the entire picture. And I think one thing that comes into this, and I know it sounds blurry, but I think it's about values to a certain extent. You have to, it sounds blurry, it's not blurry. You have to have politicians who have values, who pushes for those values, and who gives the opinions, who gives people a way. This is a country that I want to see in 10 years. This is what I want to see in 15 years. So politicians can challenge the concept of quick response and quick questions, but they have to do it. And there is in the gains of politicians to do it, but it has to be done.
Mahir, you're on overtime, but
no, just I think young people should not wait for politicians to invite them to engage. I think what's at stake is your future. We're almost gone. It's for you that you have to actually engage and fight for your right at the table, because if you wait for politicians to make the space for you, it will not happen, because politicians will always just look about their own interest. And we have today the highest number of young people on the planet ever. 1.8 billion people of the world today is youth. I'm not talking about the children. It's 14 to 28. And the developing countries have the bulk of the youth. And developed countries actually are aging populations, and you don't have enough youth and young people. So even the formula of, we don't want migrants, countries, you do need workforce. You do need young people. And you're not going to be able to manufacture those. Thank you.
And so, thank you very much, Charlotte, Anders, Maher, and Christina. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we're going to continue this discussion, if you want to be part of it, where we also say how can we find the momentum when it comes to challenging global catastrophic risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.